Hello everyone, and welcome back to Travel with Brian. On today's episode, we'll be discussing a topic that is always peaceful and has never caused controversy. That topic, of course, is politics. While many states strongly favor one political side or another, there are still a fair number of states that tend to stay in the middle. Therefore, I thought it would be interesting to analyze each state and determine which are the most politically neutral. For the purposes of this video, political neutrality has two definitions: either states that consistently have close elections between the candidates of the two major parties, or states that regularly elect candidates from both major parties. For determining the level of political neutrality, I first had to determine a method to quantify the political neutrality of states. This process required the most research and statistical analysis of any video that I've made. To obtain these numerical values, I reviewed each state's gubernatorial, U.S. Senate, and presidential election results from 2008 through 2022. I started in 2008 since the current political climate largely was set in place in the 2008 election. I used each election's results as part of my method to determine a neutrality score, as I've decided to call it. A higher score implies a greater level of neutrality. This method required several statistical steps, and I will avoid spending more time explaining it so that I can get to the point. For those interested in the methodology, it will be fully explained in the video description. I'm sure it is far from statistically and politically perfect, so if you have any criticism of my methodology, please let me know in the comments. But that's enough with the boring part, let's get started with the countdown. Starting off at number 10, we have the state of Arizona. Arizona is generally considered to be a swing state in presidential elections. The Republican candidate has had slight victories in the 2008, 2012, and 2016 presidential elections. However, these were offset by Joe Biden's victory in 2020. When it comes to gubernatorial and Senate elections, Arizona was a solidly Republican state through the 2016 election cycle. However, recent elections have turned the corner and resulted in noticeable, albeit slight, election victories for most Democrats. If Arizona continues on its current trend, it very likely could become a solidly Democratic state in the near future. However, its recent election results still portray it as a significantly neutral state, given its neutrality score of 15.79. Next up, at number 9, we have the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is usually considered to be a swing state when it comes to presidential elections. This fact is widely supported since there was less than a 6 percentage point difference between the Democrat and Republican candidates of each presidential election from 2012 through 2020. In 2008, it barely exceeded 10 percentage points. When it comes to gubernatorial and Senate elections, Pennsylvania has had solid victories from candidates from both parties. Due to its close presidential elections and consistent back and forth with candidates from both parties for other elections, it is no wonder that Pennsylvania is a fairly neutral state and has a neutrality score of 17.91. Coming in at number 8, we have the state of Florida. This should be no surprise to anyone, since Florida is always one of the most hotly contested swing states. In presidential elections, Barack Obama slightly edged his Republican opponents in the 2008 and 2012 presidential elections. However, in the years since then, Florida has leaned more in the direction of the Republican Party. The 2016, 2018, and 2020 election cycles were small, though significant victories for all Republicans. However, Florida had two solidly Republican victories in the 2022 election, which potentially could signal a change in the political direction of the state for the near future. At the current time, Florida has a neutrality score of 19.7. At number 7, we have the state of Missouri. This one was a bit surprising to me, since Missouri has always seemed to be a solid Republican state. In all 4 presidential elections in this study, Missouri voted for the Republican candidate. Every one of these elections, except for 2008, had more than a 9-point victory for the Republican candidate. In addition to the presidential elections, the Republican candidates won every election from 2016 onward. However, this trend of Republican domination has not always been the case. The 2008 and 2012 gubernatorial elections, as well as the 2012 Senate election, saw double-digit victories for the Democratic candidate. These substantial victories are likely the reason why Missouri has been rated on the list of top 10 neutral states. Given the current political climate, this may likely change in the near future, but for now, Missouri has a neutrality score of 24.11. At number 6, we have the state of New Hampshire. Although it is always chalked up as a swing state, New Hampshire has voted for the Democrat in every presidential election in this study. These have all been solid victories, except for just a slight victory in 2016. When it comes to Senate elections, New Hampshire has given slight victories to Democrats in all years, except for a solid Republican victory in 2010. When it comes to gubernatorial elections, New Hampshire has been very polarized. The 2008 election saw greater than a 42-point victory for the Democratic candidate, but the 2022 election had nearly a 32-point victory for the Republican. In every election between these two, there has been a gradual increase in the percentage of votes for the Republican candidate. Given this polarizing outcome, as well as the relatively neutral outcome of its Senate and presidential elections, it is no wonder that New Hampshire has a neutrality score of 40.22. At number 5, we have the state of Maine. Maine is quite an anomaly when it comes to elections. As a whole, the state votes pretty solidly in favor of Democrats in presidential elections. The Democratic candidate has had a comfortable lead of at least 9 percentage points in every presidential election in this study, except for 2016. However, when it comes to gubernatorial and Senate elections, it is clear that Maine does not strictly follow party lines. The 2008 and 2014 Senate elections saw a victory of more than 20 percentage points for the Republican candidate. On the other hand, the 2018 Senate election saw nearly a 30-point victory for the Democratic candidate, as well as the 2022 gubernatorial election, which saw greater than a 13-point victory. When considering that Maine has had such solid victories for both sides, it should be no surprise that it has a neutrality score of 50.44. Coming in at number 4, we have the state of North Carolina. While it's often overlooked as a swing state, North Carolina appears to have the largest number of close elections of all states during this study. For presidential elections, there has not been greater than a 5-point victory for any candidate. When it comes to gubernatorial and Senate elections, nearly every election has come within 5 percentage points. Only 4 elections were outside of this range, including the 2010 Senate and 2012 gubernatorial elections, which were the only elections with double-digit victories. While the majority of the elections of this study were victories for the Republican candidates, North Carolina has shown that it is still willing to vote for Democrats. At the current time, North Carolina is represented by 2 Republican senators but a Democratic governor. All of these factors combined give North Carolina a neutrality score of 51.61. Next up, at number 3, we have the state of Nevada. Nevada is usually considered to be a Democratic-leaning state, which is backed up by the fact that only 3 of the elections in this study resulted in victories for the Republican candidates. However, nearly every Democratic victory was won by less than 7 percentage points, including every presidential election except for 2008. However, the most one-sided election for Nevada during this study was the 2014 gubernatorial election, which saw a 46.7-point victory for the Republican candidate. At the current time, Nevada is represented by 2 Democratic senators, but has recently elected a new Republican governor. Overall, Nevada has a neutrality score of 67.42. Coming in at number 2, we have the state of Wisconsin. As my home state, I am not surprised at all that Wisconsin is rated so highly on this list. While Wisconsin has consistently voted Democrat in most presidential elections, with the exception of 2016, it is never a guaranteed result. Only the 2008 election had a double-digit victory for any party. In fact, the 2 most recent elections had victories of less than 1 percentage point. When it comes to gubernatorial and Senate elections, there is no guarantee for candidates from either party. Wisconsin elected a Republican governor in 2010 as well as a Republican senator. Each candidate would go on to win 3 subsequent elections, including an attempted recall of the governor in 2012. However, none of these victories were by a margin of greater than 7 percentage points. In addition, Wisconsin has had significant victories for its Democratic Senate candidate during the 2012 and 2018 elections, as well as its Democratic governor in 2018 and 2022. Due to these consistently close elections, as well as support for candidates from both parties, Wisconsin has a neutrality score of 98.64. Before we move along to number 1, I just wanted to ask you to please go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I hope to continue to entertain and educate you, and I am definitely appreciative of your support. Finally, at number 1, we have the state of Montana. I'm sure you are just as shocked about this result as I am, especially since Montana is almost always considered a solid Republican state for presidential elections. From 2012 through 2020, the Republican candidate enjoyed a solid double-digit victory in every presidential election. However, Montana's neutrality comes from its back-and-forth ability to elect senators and governors from both parties. Not only does Montana regularly vote for both parties, but it does so with highly significant margins of victory. In 2008, Montana voted for a Democratic governor and a Democratic senator with victory margins of nearly 46 and 33 points respectively. On the other hand, Montana had substantial double-digit victories for Republican candidates in the 2014 and 2020 Senate elections, as well as the 2020 gubernatorial election. When you consider Montana's ability to strongly vote for both parties, it is no surprise that it has a neutrality score of 109.15. Before I go, I just wanted to say thank you very much to each and every one of you for watching my video today. I hope that I was able to entertain and educate you, and I hope that you will join me again. Until next time, this has been Travel with Brian.